True Law Stories, I'm Garlic, and today we're going to talk about adoptions and guardianships and Britney Spears and craziness with the amazing adoption and guardianship and general family attorney, Mary Kay Wimsett out of Gainesville, Florida. Mary Kay, thanks for being on.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Mary Kay was on my original podcast, one of the first guests, talking about gay adoption was first allowed in Florida. That was a while ago, and things been crazy since. And today we're going to talk about, some heartwarming adoptions, how guardianships help young people, because I think there's, people don't know about these things until they get involved in it. I mean, I've personally been involved in the whole guardianship stuff, and people don't realize how important they are. And especially, I think we discount mental health a lot. And people's health, and so before we get started and talking about crazy stories about crazy things, tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice.
So I am a sole practitioner in Gainesville, Florida. I have lived in Gainesville for a long time, grew up here and then escaped for undergrad, and then also left after law school. Never thought I would end up raising my family here. But once my husband and I started having children and my parents offered to help take care of them, and kind of was a perfect storm, and my husband had a job opportunity at the University of Florida. So we moved back to Gainesville and have been here ever since. So since 2002. So about, oh gosh, let's see, 15 years ago, I started my own firm. I had been working in the public sector as a public defender, and then had transitioned to a guardian ad litem attorney, working in the Second Circuit back in the day when the guardian ad litem attorneys were actually under the judges, which is interesting. But and I covered a whole judicial circuit. So I covered 6 counties, had about, I don't know, 800 cases, was in court all day long, every day. But it was a great job. But I transitioned to Gainesville, and we could talk about how the guardian ad litem program has changed and grown over the years for an entire podcast, but we won't do that today. But
but what is a guardian ad litem? Because a lot of people listening to this don't know what a guardian ad litem is.
Yeah, and there is a distinction between a guardian ad litem and a guardianship. So we're going to talk about different types of guardianships too today. So a guardian ad litem is appointed by the court to make a recommendation for whoever they've been appointed to as to what's in their best interest. So the term ad litem means you're advocating for best interest. So you see guardian ad litem, there's a statewide program in Florida called the guardian ad litem program. It's called CASA, which is court-appointed special advocate in a lot of other states. So if any of you aren't in Florida, if you've heard of CASA, it's the same thing basically as the guardian ad litem program, which is a statewide program where a volunteer is appointed to represent a child in foster care, and there's an attorney that also works with that volunteer. So I was the attorney for the program, for the local program, and then I still help the statewide program with special projects and that kind of thing, just because I've been doing this forever. But then there are ad litems appointed actually also in guardianship cases. So guardianship cases are probate proceedings where someone is incapacitated or developmentally disabled, and so they need some assistance or help with taking care of their affairs. So, but before, unlike I told you we were going to talk about Britney Spears some, but in the Britney Spears case, it's sort of unclear. And I'll be honest, I have not done a deep dive into the actual specifics of the case. I've just read, the general media reporting on it. So I would be very curious to actually look at the court file, because in Florida, if you object to a guardianship, well, you're appointed an ad litem. Everyone's appointed an ad litem. If you object to the guardianship, your ad litem, makes that known to the court. There's due process for folks where a guardianship is being sought. There's an exam committee that's appointed. If you don't have a disability, now if you have a developmental disability, and there's a carve out for special disabilities like autism, CP, Prader-Willi, those special disabilities, if you don't have one of those disabilities, then you have to whoever's seeking to get the guardianship against you has to prove in court that you're incapacitated. And they have to do that through an exam committee, which is composed of, there has to be at least one MD on the committee, one medical doctor, and then it's a combination of like a psychologist, a social worker, a nurse, but three professionals, mental health professionals, who do an evaluation and do a report. And then there's a hearing on those reports. So it's not easy to get a guardianship if the person, the alleged incapacitated person, objects to it and is even a little bit capacitated. So interesting to me. I don't know, again, I don't know the details of how Brittany, and maybe you do, the specifics, but I wonder, now the laws are different in every state, certainly. So in California, I think that's where the guardianship was established. Maybe it's different, but in Florida, you cannot unilaterally obtain a guardianship over someone and take control over all their assets without their objection being heard and out there being an evidentiary hearing, and a bunch of things have to happen before that's put in place. But okay, I've already digressed off the topic. But so, but you are appointed in ad litem because there are certainly plenty of individuals where a guardianship is being sought where they don't agree. Like I have a case right now where the gentleman doesn't agree, but he is absolutely mentally ill. I mean, he's diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic, and then he also happens to have a medical diagnosis which is affecting his brain, and so he is truly, clinically insane. So I have to object and I represent him. I do both sides of those cases. So I represent a lot of alleged incapacitated, and then I also represent the guardians in a lot of the cases. So, but I have to object on his behalf because because he's objecting. But and what that looks like is just making sure that the system is working as it should. So making sure that the exam committee has met with him, making sure that their reports are thorough. Just again ensuring that there's due process. But I've had some really interesting ones where, like, I represented an older gentleman who was very did not have Alzheimer's, was living alone into his 90s, managed his affairs, but he had started to slip, cognitive delay. And there's lots of stuff now about how that frontal, as we age and our brain we become more and more susceptible to exploitation because our brain doesn't want to let us acknowledge that someone that we like or care about could be taking advantage of us. So, unfortunately, you do see cases where, like, this gentleman was borderline incapacitated, but, maybe we could have won the guardianship, fought the guardianship successfully, but he was clearly being exploited. He had a very young woman caretaker who had, met him like in the lobby of a doctor's office, had inserted herself into his life, was, before he knew it, the family knew it, she was living with him, and had moved in her friend who had a horrible criminal record, and her kids, so like all of a sudden 5 people were living with this man. He was paying for all their bills, so without the guardianship, he would have continued to be exploited, and, all his funds would have been depleted. They had spent over $1 million of his money within a year. Wow. So with the guardianship, his family was able to, and initially he objected to the guardianship, and we had to have a hearing. It was very contentious. But eventually he realized, he came around, and we had to get law enforcement involved to press charges against the woman. But he did eventually come around, moved into a condo near his daughter down in South Florida, and is so much happier, so much healthier, like doing really well because he has family that's helping to take care of him instead of these people that were taking advantage of him. So anyway, so that's again, you were like, what are we going to talk about, Mary Kay? I'm like, I don't know, wherever my brain goes. So you see ad litems in those cases. You also see ad litems actually in like injury lawsuits where children have been injured. So you'll see the court will appoint an ad litem to represent the interests of the child. So to make sure, like, for example, that the settlement is fair. So, that the parents have, instead of just like settling so they could get quick, and then also making sure that the money is put into like an annuity or a special needs trust, wherever it needs to go so that the money is protected. That's just something we don't think about. But like if a child's in an accident and they get money, the system does not trust parents to spend that money in the best interest of the child. So there's an ad litem that's appointed to make sure, that all those, and most families do. I mean, it's very, very unusual that there's actually a legitimate concern, but every now and then, there can be. So, and the court certainly doesn't want to let the money, be squandered. So.
Yeah, and I mean, this is interesting things that people don't think about until they need them, and then it's generally an emergency, isn't it?
Right, right.
And we don't think about guardianships, but I mean, it seems to, I've talked to a lot of people about it. It seems that it comes up, especially a lot in parents, but then like you were talking about, it comes up in younger people too. We were talking about a case with a younger person, right? And I mean, because a lot of when we talk about homeless and things like that, most of those people have some sort of mental issue, mental disability, and they're just not being taken care of. It's not like this, people think it's this voluntary thing, and we really find that most of the, I mean, I saw, 70 to 80% of the people in our prison system have some sort of mental issue, mental disease. And it leads to this stuff, but guardianships can help protect them, right? I mean, that's probably what was going on originally. The idea behind Brittany having a guardianship was to protect her. And so you were talking about, but it can help a lot. It can transform people's lives, can it?
Yes, like been working with a family for a number of years where they, the young man went into the military out of high school, was in the military and we don't know what happened in the military. Something happened in the military. He had some sort of, we don't know if it was like a psychotic break or, you never know. Maybe he used, drugs that he shouldn't have used, or he had some sort of, he never served overseas. Like he never went into war. He was always like, stationed in the United States, but you never know. I mean, that can be a pretty intense environment. There was some sort of trauma. Something happened where he had a break and paranoid schizophrenia is fascinating illness. And, some people, they don't know like what triggers. Some people, are just predisposed. They're going to, if they have the genes, it's coming. But then they think too that some people can be, and I'm not, of course, an expert on it. I've just heard a lot of psychologists and doctors talk about it. But some people can have like a triggering event that causes them to become, a paranoid schizophrenic. So he started developing symptoms of schizophrenia.
What are some of the symptoms?
Paranoia, delusional. He thought that the military and this is very apparently really common. I've seen this in a couple of paranoid schizophrenics where he thought he had something implanted. The military had implanted something in his jaw. And he just, the family kept trying to get him help, but part of the illness too is not, admitting that not denying the illness is part of the illness. So, he continued to just decompose to the point where he was homeless. He was living, basically he had a storage unit that he had all this paperwork that he was convinced showed how the military was tracking him and, all these things that had been happening to him. And he kept it in a storage unit, and his family was very loving, very wealthy family that would provide, wanted to buy him a house, whatever, but he wanted to live this way. He lived like in his car or slept in this storage unit. He would be seen wandering around town. But he also, he exercised. He looked healthy. He was very attractive. So like if you were sitting next to him, like, or in line next to him at the grocery store, you would never know. Like he totally could keep it together. He came to the hearing for the guardianship, in a suit, understood like that it was serious. He was very polite to everyone. But then as soon as we got into the hearing, and I represented the family trying to get him help, trying to get the guardianship. Once we started the hearing, as soon as I started asking him questions, he just started talking about the devices implanted in him, how they were listening to him, how his family had stolen his money when he didn't have any. I mean, the family was the ones that had the money, so this whole, it was and the judge, it was interesting in that hearing, the judge we just kind of let him talk for a while because he made his own, he made my case just by his own, statements. And of course there was an exam committee there was a doctor, PhD, and a nursing doctorate. A doctorate in nursing. She's a doctor, but she's a nurse, so I don't know. Doctor.
We'll figure it out later.
A specialist.
A specialist.
Who all had examined him and diagnosed him, said absolutely. So, anyways, the result, and that was a guardianship where he did not want the guardianship. He had an attorney that represented him. We had to have a big hearing. We ended up getting the guardianship in place. We were able to get his medication to be ordered through the court. With schizophrenia, you can get a shot like once a month, and it does a pretty good job of, well, not for everyone. So we got lucky that the medication the first med they tried worked. And, and now he's like living in his own apartment. He interacts with his family all the time. He's been dating some people. He goes to the gym every day. Like, he's living this super healthy lifestyle, volunteers. He's getting his real estate license. Like, he's totally been able to come so far from where he was. And if we hadn't had the guardianship, he would have never, if we were not able to get the medication ordered, he'd probably be dead by now, because he was on a path, and just being homeless is very, it's very dangerous. And especially now with COVID, I mean, he wouldn't be vaccinated, all of those things. It's just very, very scary to think what would have happened. And now he's like just doing so well. So everyone thinks of guardianships as this negative thing, but they really can help people. The problem is, though, as a society, something that people don't realize is they're really expensive. So the family has to have money to get it set up, and then you have to have a family member that's willing to do it. If you don't have a family member that's willing to do it, there are professional guardians, but they charge by the hour. That's very expensive. We have a public guardian, but they are so underfunded and overwhelmed. They only represent folks, for the most part, who are in like the state hospitals, like in severely handicapped, severely mentally ill, that are in an institution where they have no one at all to take care of them. So, they've had to like triage and take care of those folks where there's no one. But, anyone who's, higher functioning and not committed to an institution, it's very difficult to find. And usually they're very difficult to find guardians, because usually they burn bridges. Usually the family is like done, or the family just can't afford to set it up. You have to pay for, all these things to get the guardianship set up. So it's just very, it's not ideal. But there also is, again, I think right now, especially because, and I can't think of her name, but there's been a lot of press, and she was from Orlando, so I'm sure you've heard about it. That professional guardian.
Yeah, she was 3 doors down from our office.
Okay, so she ruined it for a lot of people by her actions. But I've worked with many, many professional guardians over the years, and none of them have done anything. I've never acted in any way, shape, or form in any way close to what she did. And also, I guess maybe I'm fortunate that I'm in a part of the state where we have, a pretty small population, and so we're able to really, the judges really look at the cases, and I think I'm also fortunate that my judiciary has prioritized these types of cases. So there's actually staff for the court that looks very closely at them. There's an accounting that has to be filed. They count every penny. Like, it would be very difficult in my circuit for someone to get away with, the things that she did. But I mean, unfortunately there are bad, bad apples in everywhere.
You're going to be able to find the person, right? You're always going to be able to find, I mean, when you have thousands of pounds, thousands of people doing stuff, there's going to be one bad person or two bad people. That doesn't mean we should stop doing it.
Right. But that case has really given a lot of fuel to the anti-guardianship, advocates.
But it's a necessary tool, isn't it? I mean, it is, because there's a lot of people that just can't take care of themselves, and it's like, what's the other option? Just let them out in the streets.
Right.
But so that was a happy ending to a tough thing, and but you do a lot of adoptions too, right?
Yeah.
And what do people not get about adoptions? What are people's misconceptions about it?
Well, and I think I even had this misconception about adoption when I first started. It'd be fun to go back and look at those videos that you took of me like 15 years ago. I remember too, it's just, you really are a genius, ahead of your time. I remember you made me do those videos and I was like, why are we doing this? Who looks at the internet, I don't want to be on Facebook. That seems dumb. Although I was right about that part, but you think about it all being happy and pretty babies and all these things, but there is still that loss of a parent, placing their child for adoption, or a parent losing their rights because they're unable to care for a child. And then the child, that child growing up with so much love from the adoptive family, but there will always be that piece, that part of their story. So, I do think we're doing a much better job in the adoption world of, back in the day, we used to, even when I first started, closed adoptions were a lot more common, where you didn't tell the kid they were adopted till they were like an adult. Or you had no contact, no information about the birth family. So now most adoptions are pretty open. So, in the sense that you at least know information about each other. Like the birth mom picks the family from a book, which is, and there's basically there's three different kind of types of adoptions, essentially. And the most common adoption are kids that are adopted through the dependency system, foster care system. Those kids are adopted because their parents' rights were terminated because there was abuse, abandonment, or neglect. So in those cases, of course, there typically are not open adoptions. But every now and then there can be, because in dependency cases, parents don't just have their kids taken away from them. They are given a case plan where they have the opportunity to get services and potentially reunify with their kids. Part of that process is usually having visitation. So I do have cases where the foster parents develop a relationship with the birth parents, and the foster parents end up adopting, and they end up having an open adoption with the birth parents. So that does happen. But so foster parents, that the majority of kids that are adopted in Florida are adopted from the foster care system. The next biggest chunk of kids that are adopted are relative or step-parent adoptions. So grandparents, aunts, uncles, folks that usually have been taking care of the child for a while, or something happens where the parents pass, or the parents, really the only families that go into the dependency system now are the cases that are really horrible, like horrific abuse, substance abuse, that kind of thing. There's a whole other sector of people where, kids have a drug problem, but they're getting some help. If a child's protected, so the parent has a drug problem or a mental health problem, if they place the child with a relative, that child's not going to end up in the foster care system. That's just, the relatives are just like, okay, I'm taking care of the kid. They can get some benefits depending on their income. But there's just thousands of children that are in those type of placements where the state isn't involved and they're living with, relatives, or step parents. Lots of step parents where, the parent has remarried and the new spouse wants to adopt the child. So that's the next kind of bulk of. So I would say probably, and I don't know, there's probably data somewhere, but this is just based on what I see. I'm at every adoption docket. What I see generally, I would say 60 to 70 of the cases are, and now remember, I'm a lawyer, so I'm not good at math, but 60 to 70 are foster care, and then you're looking at maybe another 20 or so, 20 to 30% are family. By family, I mean either relatives or step parent. And then the smallest percentage are the or private adoption. So what, like the Juno situation, what everyone thinks about, like the young birth mom having a baby and placing the baby for adoption.
Yeah.
So that's actually like the smallest segment. But
Interesting. We all
yeah,
think that that's all of adoption is that, right?
right. But in terms of the number of kids that are adopted, it's actually pretty small. But the foster care piece of it, though, that's not a business. Like those kids, those kids, they're placed for adopted and adopted through the state system. Where so you might, I mean, part of the reason why you see more about private adoption is because it is more of it's an industry. It's
Hmm.
so there's agencies and attorneys, that are facilitating those adoptions. So
Gotcha. And so you were going to talk a little bit about the birth mothers and and some of the interesting cases there because that's got to be tough and also just an unusual situation around, especially when you consider open adoption.
yes, it's interesting because my oldest daughter, who was supposed to go to college last year and ended up staying home because she didn't want to go to school remotely, and she worked for me as my receptionist. And she said to me after like a couple months of work, she said, "Mom, I didn't realize you're totally a counselor and a therapist." I'm like, "Yeah, attorney and counselor at law." And so you do spend, you spend time working with the birth moms. I mean that's my favorite part, honestly, of the process is getting to know the families, assuring the families through the process, working with the birth moms. You of course want to, I never want to be involved in an adoption where the birth mom feels pressured. But it is, it's a difficult situation because usually it is very difficult still, though, to execute the paperwork, even though the birth mom wants to place the child for adoption. Oftentimes, it's still a very like stressful and emotional time for them. So, I try and be supportive, of course, of them through the process and of the adoptive family in Florida. And attorneys represent typically um, the adoptive family or the adoption entity, and then birth parents do not have their own attorney. So some states require birth parents to have their own attorney, but not in Florida. So, and of course, I have an ethical obligation to always tell a birth parent what the law is, the truth, all of those things. But I also just feel like a higher calling to, I only want to facilitate adoption where a birth mom feels like this, she's making the right decision. But it doesn't mean it's an easy decision. It's still a very hard decision. And, I think too, a big myth in adoption is that birth moms are, like Juno, they're not high school students, straight A high school, super smart high school students. I mean, most women who are seeking to place their children for adoption are doing that because they can't, for some reason, raise a child on their own, be it, financial pressures, um, uh, substance abuse problems, mental health problems, young. But I've worked with birth moms that are older. I mean, birth moms in their 40s who, accidentally pregnant and already, raise their kids who are just like, I financially cannot raise another child. Many women who don't intend to get pregnant and then don't find out they're pregnant, until it's too late for them to terminate the pregnancy. They find out when they're 22 weeks or something, so they keep the pregnancy. Many of them not in great relationships, either with their family or the father of the baby, very like high stress situations, many of the time, most of the time, I would say. So try and help those women get into counseling so they can get some support through that process, and so that they're prepared too, because I think, they, my job is to help everyone be prepared for the birth and for the adoption process to help that go as smooth as it possibly can. So I think it's, it'd be terrible to lie to a birth mom and say, you're going to feel so great when you have the baby and signing the paperwork's just going to be a breeze. Like I don't, I think that would make the process much worse, than trying to prepare them for that part is going to be, can be emotionally very difficult.
And so, I mean, we were talking before about a few of the stories that you had.
Yeah, so one of my most favorite birth moms, and I'm looking, you can't see here, but I have like a board where I have all pictures and notes and letters and everyone. This is for when I'm working like at 8 o'clock at night and I'm really tired. I can look up and be inspired. But, um, I'm looking at
That's important.
her graduation invitation from UF. She was a young woman. She was, I think, 18. Um, she knew she loved the father very much, but he was very immature in ways. Like he was a huge video gamer. They both were students at Santa Fe, which is the community college here, but he just was not, she just knew they were not in a place where they could raise a child. And they struggled. At first they were going to try and raise a baby, and then she just decided that there was no way. And I remember when she came to meet with me in my office, she rode her bike to my office, which was a couple miles away. And we were just talking generally about like what, just about her life and things like that. And she told me how she rode her bike to school, and then she worked at a restaurant called Sonny's on Archer Road here in Gainesville, which is pretty far from her apartment. And it was, hot in the summer. She was riding her bike to work pregnant.
Jesus.
But through the adoption, the family was able to help her, pay for transportation, helped pay for her. An adoption allows for birth mom expenses. So we were able to help with her rent. We were able to help with her food. We were able to help with transportation. We were able to help with, and what happened is when we were able to help with food and housing, for example, she was able to save her money from working at Sunny's, and then she was able to buy a car, and then we paid for gas and things like that. So, really, really transformed her life, and she said to me, when she sent me the graduation invitation, which I think was like 4 or 5 years after she had the child, um, that without the adoption, I would have never been able to get on my feet financially. I mean, it just truly made a tremendous impact in her life, in terms of helping her be able to move forward. And what an amazing, gift for the family too. I mean, the family, to have a child after struggling with infertility and all of, most of the families that are adopting have, for many reasons, not been able to have children on their own. So, and this family had been through that. So for them to have also this incredible gift of a child, is really just amazing. Like that's like your dream adoption story. Not every birth mom is able to go on and graduate from the University of Florida, but many of them I think are able. The adoption process does help them, um, you know, get through the pregnancy, because oftentimes, a lot of them are working at jobs where they lose their job once they're pregnant,
Mm.
that kind of thing. So I mean, it really can greatly improve the life of the birth mother. So, anyways, that's one of my favorite happy stories of adoption. Um,
Yeah, and there's lots of families out there too that want to have children, right? And just
right.
can't. And this adds to their life and improves their life. And I mean, it's amazing stories, and
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
definitely more families for sure. There are many more families that are waiting to adopt than babies that are available. So birth parents really get to pick whatever type of family they want. So, we started out by talking about same-sex couples, and I remember, that used to be a big deal. And now it's like, yeah, like half my caseload, are same-sex couples. So it's fascinating to see how quickly um, we've caught up on that issue. Specifically, I think it's pretty fascinating to see as a society how quickly we've come around on that concept. I mean, when I first was practicing, I remember when I was working for the Guardian Ad Litem program, and I visited a foster parent who was this amazing foster parent, and I mean, I didn't ask him because it was very clear that we didn't want to know if he was gay, but it was obvious to me that he was gay. But we never acknowledged it. We never asked him, because if he had identified as gay, he would not have been able to be a foster parent. And I've kept up with him over the years, and he's fostered, I think he was up to 12 kids, like, that have gone on to go to college, have these amazing lives. And these are all kids in foster care that, no one else wanted to take care of. So, I'm so glad Florida has at least, I mean, I know Florida, we kind of are behind, um, behind the mark on some things, but I'm very glad on that issue, especially. We've really, through legal advocacy, have been able to make like a huge difference, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, this is and this is what I like about law stories is that we see a lot of the stuff on TV, like the really harsh or like criminals or stuff, but really the law can help transform people's lives in a positive way, like you talked about today, and it's fantastic. It's really cool to do that, and so. If someone is looking for adoption in Florida or guardianship in Florida, how do they get in touch with you?
Okay, so caveat, if it's a guardianship, you want an attorney that practices in the area where you're going to file the guardianship. So while I would love to do them everywhere, that would be horrible advice for me to give you to hire. So you want to hire someone who practices a lot in the area where the guardianship needs to be filed, and it needs to be filed in the county where the alleged incapacitated person lives or disabled person lives. And I am in the 8th Circuit and the 3rd Circuit generally. I do some cases in the 7th and the 5th, but I'm North Central Florida basically, in the 5th Circuit. So you can always call and we can talk to you about where, if we're able to help you or not. I have a website, adoptionlawfl.com. I'm sure you will put it up in the comments.
Yeah, we'll put all that in the comments down below.
And then for adoptions, we do those all over the country, actually. But we help families from all over the country. But we, in terms of birth mothers in Florida, so the way the laws work is you want an attorney generally wherever the baby's going to be born. So, and then for foster care adoptions, generally you want an attorney in the area. It's kind of like the same with guardianships. You want someone who knows all the players, knows the system. So, you want someone kind of in the area. But for private placements, like for birth parents or for adoptive families, we work with families all over the state.
That's fantastic. And so we'll put the website, put a link. You can call Mary Kay. She's pretty nice. She'll tell.
We'll talk to you all day long.
Well, Mary Kay, thank you so much. We'll make sure to put a link to her website down below. Put comments down below if you have any comments. Share your stories down below of guardianships and adoptions, especially if you're watching this on YouTube. But Mary Kay, thank you so much for being on True Law Stories.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you all for taking Mary Kay on your journey. It's been Ian Garlic and True Law Stories.